Hi, my name is Michael Stone, and Lodro asked me if I would talk about the relationship between Buddhist practice and social action. I'm based here in Toronto, and I've always been interested in how practice can come alive in urban environments. Most of my own training was in rural settings, and as I started to grow a family and realized that my life was going to be urban, I wanted to find a way to bring practices alive, my own practice alive, the tradition of Buddhism alive, in the complexity of a city, in the complexity of a family, in the pressures and the possibilities of being awake in contemporary, urban, messy, industrial life. When I was in Japan last month, I was practicing at Daitokuji Monastery, and one day after practice, the elderly sensei there came up to me in the garden during work practice, and we talked about the Bodhisattva vow, this vow to serve all beings. And he said, do you really understand that the core of this practice is to serve all sentient beings? And I said, I think I do, as I was picking maple shoots from the moss garden. And he said, you can translate serving all beings as taking care of everything. And then he said, the disparity between rich and the poor is too great, and that's not taking care of one another. The disparity, he said, between the educated and the uneducated is increasing, and that's not people taking care of each other. And immediately when he said this, I was really touched by this sense that the heart of all of these practices that we do is to really learn how to take care of things, really learn how to take care of each other. You know, we call what we do spiritual practice in an effort to sort of get away from this sense that we live in a materialistic culture. But maybe we don't live in a materialistic culture. Maybe in a way we are not materialistic enough. To be materialistic means to love the material, to take care of the body, to wash our hands and really take care of our hands. Dogen says when you're in the kitchen, to pick up whatever you have with two hands and to take care of it like it's your eyesight. I wonder if I can do that with my bicycle, with my home, with my floor, with my body, with my friends. In a way, I would say that the heart of our practice is intimacy, because healing only takes place where there's intimacy. And intimacy is what happens when compartmentalization ends. So in a way, if there are parts of our body that are not communicating with one another, where there's no intimacy, then there's no healing possible. So our job in taking care of the body is having all the different parts of the body in a space where they can communicate with each other. And in a way, you could say the same thing about healing in our relational lives. When there are parts of ourselves that can't communicate with one another, where we've taken parts of ourselves and split them off. Oh, this is not spiritual, or the realm of money, or the realm of sexuality is not part of my practice. Then that's where we get in trouble. That's compartmentalization. It's splitting. And so healing comes when we end compartmentalization, when we realize that deep healing and transformation really only happen through intimacy. And the Buddha knew this. The Buddha was constantly teaching about intimacy. He was teaching about intimacy with trees. He was teaching about intimacy within the Sangha. He was teaching about social intimacy by having his students shave their heads, so you couldn't tell at first which gender they were or what socioeconomic background they had. So if we say that real personal healing comes through intimacy and through ending compartmentalization, maybe the same is true as we start to apply the Dharma to our social sphere, the economic world, the environmental world. Because there are parts of our culture that we split off and treat like garbage. There are people in this city that we treat like garbage. So how do we take the parts of our city that have been compartmentalized and bring them back into the fore, bring them back into our own heart? So if healing only happens through intimacy, then you can say the whole of our practice is to become intimate with the way things actually are. We hear this from our teachers over and over again, to actually be with things the way they are. There's a wonderful line by Shunryu Suzuki in his text, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, where he says, if you really stay in the place of an open heart, if you stay in the place of the breath, if you stay in the attentive place of a beginner, then the precepts or your ethical life takes care of itself. And I like to call this situational ethics. And this is the heart of what I mean by social action. Situational ethics means not coming into a situation with preconceptions or a high road of what the ethical thing to do is. So for example, for many years doing activist work, I was really committed to what I thought nonviolence was. So I would come into a situation with preconceptions of what, Gandhiism is. And over time I started to realize that I was connecting less and less with the situation and more with where I thought the situation should go. In a way, from a meditator's perspective, I was really not intimate with the complexity of an issue because I was only willing to see how that issue could be dealt with nonviolently. So in a way, part of this practice that we do every day, sitting here on the cushion, is to inhale and exhale, and to notice how our mind wanders off into language and theory and story, and how the practice of just coming back to the breath over time becomes a kind of dropping of our addiction to rigid and chronic stories. Well, what does this mean at a social level? How can our culture realize that we're addicted to stories about electricity, about oil, about the environment, that are not only unsustainable, but they're causing great suffering? The fish don't care about your enlightenment. Forests don't care about my awakening. They care about my actions. And so we need to replace this idea of spirituality with a sense of materialism, a sense that we need to love the material, to take care of the body, to take care of each other. Also, when we think about spirituality, we think vertically. And we need to replace this idea of vertical transcendence, I think, with a model of horizontal transcendence, so that our practice goes from me trying to reach nirvana to get up and out of here, which I think provides for a poor contemporary ethical framework for living. And we need to replace this with a sense of horizontal awakening, relational awakening, social awakening. Social action doesn't mean just tying yourself to a tree. It doesn't just mean chaining yourself to a boat delivering coal in the Great Lakes. Social action might mean really staying home and looking after your kids. It might mean dedicating the next 5 years of your life to keeping your mother's elderly feet warm and soft in the hospital. It might mean volunteering at a hospice, or it might mean realizing you've been volunteering at a hospice for a long time and maybe there's some burnout and you need to take care of yourself now. In other words, if social action is situational, it's always changing. It's not a philosophy. It's not an ideology. So horizontal transcendence means that the heart of practice is the intimacy of waking up to the situation that's right here in front of us. As a culture, we're asleep right now. We're not awake to the terrible suffering being caused by the disparity in our economy. We're not awake to the fact that the environment is the shadow side of a growth-based economy. And I think as we start to wake up, it actually becomes quite painful, because in a way, we then have to see the parts of ourselves and the parts of our society that we've compartmentalized. And to me, that's what's so inspiring about the Occupy movement and the offshoots of the Occupy movement that we're starting to see sprout again, which is this sense that these people in our communities and in our cities and in our countries that have not been communicating are starting to communicate. And for me, that's the heart of the Dharma. That's the heart of the Buddha's teaching. You know, when you study the Buddha's teachings on mindfulness, one of the things that always comes through is this sense that one can be mindful of anything. And nowadays, mindfulness is kind of being reduced to this sense of paying attention. But mindfulness at its base is the practice of generosity, the practice of intimacy, actually opening up, not to the way we think things should be, but how our life is actually happening. And if we can understand that that just doesn't happen inside of this skin bag, that also happens at a social level, then we can start to see clearly how, even though we might do inner work, trying to transform our greed or our anger or our confusion or upside down thinking, we also simultaneously have to do work out in the world, because service makes us happy. I don't like using the word happiness so much, but at the same time I do recognize in my life that when I'm feeling most content, I'm really serving others. So Buddhism and social action can't be separated. The heart of the Buddha's teaching is to serve. It's to connect with something much larger than the rigid narratives we have about ourselves. And so let's let go of this idea that transcendence is only vertical. Let's drop this idea that we have to have some awakening before we can do any social action. In the yoga tradition, the foundation of practice is nonviolence. And I've always liked this sense that nonviolence is not something you do to get enlightened. It's actually an expression of your enlightenment. So let's see everything we do in the material world as an expression of our awakening, rather than as something we're doing to get somewhere. Thank you for listening.